After years of negotiations, the EU and South America's Mercosur bloc have concluded a large-scale free trade agreement. But the deal is not without its detractors. France and Poland particularly fear the deal could wreak havoc on their agricultural sectors and are lobbying against ratification. The deal still needs to be greenlit by at least 15 of the EU's 27 countries.
The trade agreement has always been controversial in Europe and especially in France. French farmers have been protesting for weeks, fearing they could be overrun and undercut by agricultural imports from South America if the Mercosur deal were to be enacted. France, of course, cannot single-handedly halt the deal, but now Poland has also said it won't sign the current draft. Mercosur comprises Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Paraguay and Uruguay. Venezuela's membership is currently suspended. The bloc's joint economic product stands at $3 trillion. The 27 countries in the European Union add up to $18 trillion. Altogether, the Mercosur deal would impact 770 million people. The EU and the South American bloc have been talking for a quarter century. Meanwhile, China has massively increased its own trade with Mercosur. Now the pressure is on the EU to finally act. The situation is exacerbated as Donald Trump will become US president, and the EU needs to strengthen its own partnerships in the face of looming US tariffs. The current draft of the EU-Mercosur deal calls for 90% of tariffs between the two sides to be dropped. That would include tariffs on agricultural products like meat and soy, but also car parts that are being sent to the EU from South America, as well as cars, machines and chemicals being sold from the EU into Mercosur. Still, among the voices protesting the deal are environmentalists. They warn that South America's industry, which is not generally seen as sustainable and puts profits over the protection of the rainforest, could be fired up.
We can now speak to Bernd Riegert, who's been following all of this from our Brussels studio. Bernd, this has been 25 years in the making. Now that it's been agreed finally, does that mean the discussion over it is over?
Well, first of all, there's a strong approval by most of the business community in Europe, especially companies that export and make machines and cars. In Germany, these companies say this is a good deal. On the other hand, there are farmers and also environmental groups that say the deal is bad because they fear that cheap beef or soybeans from Latin America will flood European markets and lower the standards. So this dispute is not dissolved, and France, Poland and Italy, countries with a strong agricultural sector, are opposing the deal. And the French President Emmanuel Macron just said yesterday the deal as it is on the table is unacceptable.
All right. What exactly are France, Poland and Italy specifically worried about?
Well, for example, the French farmers argue that the meat from the Mercosur countries is too cheap and produced on low standards and would harm the whole business in France, and also the wine industry is up in arms. But the Commission, the EU Commission that has the sole mandate to negotiate this deal, says this assessment is not correct because there's also a chance for French winemakers to actually export their wine to Latin America now. And the meat sector, for example, only incorporates 1.2% of the whole meat consumption in Europe. So this dispute is not resolved, but France is very much on the barricades now and is trying to organize a blocking minority before the Council of the EU is going to vote.
So what happens next?
Well, the deal is not over the finish line yet. There are lots of legal hurdles still in the way. The next step would be a vote in the Council of the EU, which represents the member states. There are 15 countries that represent 65% of the population are needed to get a majority. France, Poland, Italy say they want to form a blocking minority, so they would need 4 countries and 35% to do that. And also the European Parliament has to vote. And then there are also a few of other steps, which is rather complicated, but it can take at least a couple of months until this deal goes into fruition and is actually observed, at least preliminary.
That was Bernd Riegert in Brussels. Thanks.